or all that sort of thing. I know
Except
that's obvious, but
ironically.
just to let you all know.
Except ironically, right?
Oh, all right. So I think first what we need to do is we need to define our positions and explain our positions. So I'll just I'll just pick who goes first using the time-tested method of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So let's see. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a dagger by his toe. If he hollers, let him go.
All right, come on.
My Lennon says you'll go. Okay, so Red Star team, Sergio and Evan will define their positions first.
Okay, I'm going to go first. I consider myself to be a generic Leninist. And by that, I mean, I don't give out a specific following word after that, in that, Trotsky, Tito, Stalin, Castro, Che, Mao, Mine, Hoxha, all that, they had their strengths and weaknesses. So I think it's pretty pointless to try to debate which of them was the best, and just take what they did right and learn from them, and what they did wrong and try to correct it in the future. Because at the end of the day, all of them, in a way, did consider themselves to be followers in the tradition of Lenin. So yes, that's my position, generic Leninist. It makes me very interesting when the MLs or Maoists and the Trots all have a debate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I more or less agree with that. I would call myself Leninist. I would hang a pendant of Lenin over my mantle, which you can see in a previous video. What was it called? Sagron of Akkad gets destroyed. You can see it. Anyways.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
And Leninism, here's a preview of my next video. Leninism is an extension of Marxist theory founded by Russia. No, I won't read the whole thing. But yeah, basically I agree with Sergio on that, or Taryn. Go by their internet names. I come from a Trotskyist background, so that's kind of the position that I'm most familiar with and tend to side with, I guess.
It'll make the debate a whole lot more easier, because now they can just ask us questions on Lenin, Stalin, Castro, and all that. And
yeah, sure.
Yeah. If you guys also want to add questions as well, I can allow that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do I check the chat now? I'm gonna chat.
All right. All right.
Anyway.
Okay. So all right. So we're going to go on to vegan.
Can Pedro go first?
Pedro? Oh, is he part of the discussion too?
I don't know.
I was just listening. Yeah.
You wanted?
Here, it'll just be me and vegan for now.
Okay. All right.
All right. So you can go ahead and define yourself first.
All right. Go ahead.
Vegan.
Go ahead,
Can you
Mr.
hear us?
Vegan.
Can you hear us?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You were stalling, weren't you?
I'm basically an anarcho-communist with slight, with a little bit of green anarchist added to it. So I'm kind of both the red and black and green and black anarchist. And I reject hierarchical institutions like the state, and I say fuck Lenin.
Oh, that's.
Oh, wow.
Oh man. Okay, it's getting
Thought
spicy.
we were supposed to. Okay. All right. Gloves are off now.
Okay. Yeah, I mostly agree with vegan in general. I just I read a lot of Emma Goldman, Murray Bookchin, Noam Chomsky, people like that. So those are the people I mostly identify with and I agree with. And I define myself as an anarcho-communist. I see a vision that that anarchism will come into play first, and which will then come as communism. So that's what I think is that's how I define myself, and also transhumanist too. Of course, I think most socialists define themselves as transhumanists, and at least some kind of green socialists as well. So that's pretty obvious, of course, but that's how I define myself. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So first topic I have here. So this might be a bit too general, but I would this I have here that says justifications for a state and arguments against. So I'll have Team Red Star. Not me, of course. I mean, of course, I'm part of Team Red Star, but I mean, like, just Evan and Sergio. Evan and Sergio can go first, and they're what justifies having a state in a socialist society?
Okay, I'm going to take this one first. I believe that the need for a state is, well, let's look at what is a state? It's basically a body that has the legitimate monopoly on violence and force in everyday society. And so because of that, a state, we can all agree it has the ability to use force, and pretty much, like, while people can question it, it is a pretty useful tool to have because, well, after a socialist revolution was to occur, there is not really a massive guarantee that every single capitalist nation in the world will immediately follow suit. Although a mass general international strike would ideally be the best thing, we'd have to bear in mind that some nations might finish their revolution first. Some nations might go all last when their socialist revolution finishes. And not to mention that a lot of states that, during a revolutionary time, will still likely be capitalist and will try to counter any revolutions that may be happening within a neighboring nation. And we can pretty much see that happening in, let's say, Bavaria or in Hungary during the interwar era. The fact that the state was like, pretty much there was like no single ability for like a state to counter the counter-revolutionaries, or the fact that neighboring nations like, I believe it was Germany and Romania, would invade them. It goes to show you that you do need a monopoly on violence in order to counter the reactionary elements of society, whether it be foreign reactionary governments or whether it be just counter-revolutionary forces from below. Because, again, you can't guarantee that everyone's going to be on board with your revolution. And let's be real, a lot of right-wingers during the revolutionary period are probably going to be setting up their own militias in an effort to counter the revolution. And large, powerful capitalist nations are obviously going to start international efforts to squash the revolution, as we saw with the Russian Revolution. Because, Lenin had a central state, it was easier for Lenin to organize forces and basically drive back the White Army as well as the international intervention. And it's also why the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War was pretty much able to stand and not face any sort of conventional warfare. The states, they had a central state to protect them. Like, imagine like if the Eastern Bloc was just a bunch of like anarchist communes with like no central authority to direct where violence is going to be exerted. I mean, that would be nice and all, but when you're right next to NATO, that's not going to work out in your favor. Also, just I do believe that there should be a welfare state in a transitional period, because while the welfare state is technically a Bismarckian method to stifle socialist revolts, I do believe there should be welfare in the transitional socialist period to uplift people and guarantee certain things like healthcare, public transportation, which I believe are rights. And I believe that these massive national institutions are best delivered by a state because of their massive scale.
I wouldn't put it quite the same. I would say that when you're talking about transitional period, that's usually that means a dictatorship of the proletariat or a socialist economy, the socialist phase of human development. I would call that a worker state rather than a welfare state, because sorry, I mean, I don't want to get too much into semantics, but a welfare state is when the capitalist state grants
I hate English. That's
it's okay. It's a bit of semantics, but yeah, that's what you meant. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, Av, what do you say? Pretty much the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, in a more traditional Marxist sense, the state is an instrument of class rule, and in order to get out of class society, the state, unfortunately, has to be used to liquidate the bourgeoisie, to get rid of the capitalist ruling class, because they're not going to go away without a fight. We've seen that time and time and time again. It started pretty much even before 1917. We saw it in 1871 with the Paris Commune. They they had to use force. And they realized the necessity of that. That it's just better. I mean, I believe in the Leninist principle of democratic centralism. If the majority of the people vote on something, then I don't think it's illegitimate for people to forcefully carry it out. If it is a plan to go towards socialism, because that's the only way forward. I see it. I don't see it happening with a completely horizontalist, consensus-only decision-making model. It's just pretty much impossible. So yeah.
Right.
Okay. Vegan, you want to go first on this one?
Oh, can you go first, Daniel?
Okay. All right. So you mentioned that the state is necessary in order to fight capitalism and capitalist invaders. I mean, which can be seen, yeah. I mean, yeah, this is like, across history. That of course the capitalists and right wingers are definitely going to fight back, of course. But I don't necessarily see why a state is necessary, considering what really matters within a war is basically tactical advantage, as well as basically just having better weapons, better men, and better trained people. I don't really understand why an organizational structure like the state would matter in a fight, to be honest. Because I mean, like, for example, in Catalonia, the workers, produced arms, and produced arms, armored cars, and that sort of thing, to fight the fascists as well as the Republican forces of Spain. Which, yes, of course, they lost, but that wasn't because that wasn't because it was under a horizontalist approach. It was because the capitalists had better weapons and could produce more than what the Catalonia workers could. So that's what I don't get. And another thing is that you guys talk about how a state, well, like you define, yeah, I agree with your definition of the state, that it indeed is a monopolization of violence, and that which you argue needs to happen in order to be used to fight capitalists. But another thing is that when you have a monopolization on violence, you also monopolize that violence on the state usually uses that violence on its own people. I mean, of course, this gets right back into Kronstadt and stuff. But I would say, go even further, that sort of thing is what created the conditions to have Stalin in power, and have the creation of gulags and the Cheka, and then later the KGB and stuff like that, to be used against its own people. So that's why I see it as a problem. Although I do kind of agree with Lenin's democratic centralism. Actually, I don't really see why that'd be incompatible with anarchism, because anarchism usually has, of course, is of course very democratic, and we can use multiple methods in order to come to a decision, as a majority of people would. Although I do think consensus democracy is the best kind of democracy, but it's not the only kind that anarchism would use. So
right, but once you come to a decision, what do you do with that decision? Is it just a suggestion, or is it enforced in any way?
Well, could you repeat your question one more time?
Once you come to a decision, what do you do with it? Is it enforced, or is it just some suggestion that people can just follow if they feel like it?
Well, I mean, certainly, when there's a decision, people can obviously choose to follow through with it. But I mean, if we're discussing it anyway, that would imply that we intend to carry out whatever decision we come to. So that's I still don't quite understand your question, because it seems like what you're trying to say is like, how can anarchists really carry out any decision when there could be? Are you saying that that if there's a possibility that somebody disagrees, that means we have to start the entire process all over?
Well, the whole point of democratic centralism is that a majority would rule, but that implies that a minority opinion is possible.
Well, yeah, anarchism, that's a possibility too. But generally, of course, with consensus, though, that means the minority can also have their own input in a decision. So I would say, of course, and of course, there's also the positions of compromise as well. Yeah. I mean, like for example, in Catalonia, I can't remember which factory this was, but I remember reading. I read this in the Anarchist FAQ, so check there for sources. But there was like a shoe factory where the workers needed basically more materials, and what they wanted to do is use their wages to buy materials from outside, Spain is what they wanted to do. Which of course that would mean they would have to pull money together in order to basically use that quote unquote profit in order to buy the materials to get those shoes. But they came to that agreement and made the decision to do that, even despite there could be minority decisions where they would say that'd be supporting the capitalists and we'd be using capitalist materials and stuff like that instead of producing our own. So that's that. I would say that's there's millions of examples I could use. Just because I'm sure there's been many decisions carried out in anarchist society. So, but I mean, that's just like one example of how a consensus decision making, how anarchists can come to a decision and carry it out.
Yeah, I know they can come to a decision that they agree on, but I'm saying what happens when a minority disagrees with the decision and they don't want to carry it out? Because wouldn't they be allowed to oppose it then?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go on, Vegan.
Oh, I'm just saying yes. They should be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's in general, and again, as I said, we can come to a compromise with which with the minority and majority can agree upon. That's essentially what consensus democracy is.
Yeah, I know, but you said that you thought that democratic centralism is compatible with anarchism, and now you're saying that a minority opinion should be allowed to carry out their minority agenda against the interests of the majority.
No, what I'm saying is that the majority and minority can come to a compromise. It's not necessarily they.
Yeah, sometimes they can, but sometimes they don't. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I mean that's a possibility, but
not just a possibility; it's an inevitability.
Maybe, maybe it is.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go back to discuss.
I could defend Dan for 1 second, which I know is going to sound incredibly weird.
Okay.
Even like I do believe that while a lot of people would call this tyranny of the majority, I do believe that anarchists and militias and all, if a minority was trying to drag everyone down or something, they could use force. I mean, like a mass unit of people is technically the exertion, and using the exertion of force would technically be governing. It's just that it's not done through a formal state. But I digress.
All right. Vegan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just like to point out whenever they tried Leninism, at least to horrific situations where people just keep getting murdered over and over again, and it leads to a very horrible form of tyranny. So historically, Leninism it leads to state capitalism, and it also has a tendency of causing all sorts of mass starvations and mass genocide and stuff like that.
I disagree.
I kind of don't see how that relates to what we're talking about with decision making, but yeah, I do want to switch over the topic. Yeah, I would also like to discuss why do you believe that Leninism wouldn't lead to something like Stalinism and basically this what do you call it? I don't know. Also just kind of basically how Leninism doesn't lead to Stalinism, and then and then the progression of the Soviet Union toward the direction of becoming capitalist again.
Well, for the same reason.
Why do you think that?
For the same reason that republicanism does not lead to Bonapartism or Cromwellism or what have you. These historical events happened within a historical context. They weren't dictated by the the general trend of the ideology. That's kind of why I think that. So it depends where it's carried out. If Leninism is carried out in another isolated country with backwards, with undeveloped. With an undeveloped economy, with the threats of sabotage and foreign invasion, any country that faces all those things constantly is going to have some very harshly repressive measures that it uses to maintain its power. Because when you take power, unless there's a completely perfect world revolution where they all take over at the same time, revolutionaries are going to be faced with a dilemma: either push for socialism, or you either give up the fight for socialism, or you clamp down.
Or face a counter-revolution.
Or face a counter-revolution. You either clamp down and do whatever you think is necessary, or you don't get to try socialism at all. Those are the only two options, and either option is going to be pretty brutal and have some downsides, but them's the breaks. There's no third option where you just have perfect socialism because everyone just gets along and nobody wants to fight against it. That's not something that historically has ever happened.
Yeah, but historically everywhere, almost, I don't know about everywhere, but now when it's tried, it tends to lead to almost exact same results, and it can easily, a strong man can easily come in there and use it as an excuse to install a dictatorship.
Yeah, that happens with capitalist states as well all the time. It's the downside of trying to build a power base that's based in the people. If you are dealing with existential threats and underdeveloped economy, then, I mean, you can watch what's it called, CGP Gray's video, The Keys to Power, or something like that. It kind of it kind of describes power in the way that I kind of think of it. That if you don't build up a power base based in mass participation in a democratic system, then you're going to have to rely on repressive measures. So it's a matter of building a workers' democracy that can be upheld, I guess.
Do you think a workers' democracy could fight back against
can I just add something more to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and like if we were to look contextually in the situations of the Eastern Bloc and its allies, I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it. I mean, Russia was a pretty underdeveloped country during the time of the revolution, and there was pretty much going to be a massive allied effort in order to crush the revolution and all that. So yeah, also there was still a lot of backwards elements within Russia, like. As a result, I'd imagine that the dictatorship was going to be a natural result of pretty much being surrounded by everyone on all fronts. And the Cold War was pretty much like a very real, like the East and Western Bloc were pretty much very real threats to each other. Or how Cuba was like a former colony of the United States, and was like, the Americans were pretty much choking Cuba dry with what's the word again? Yeah, embargo. And like, not to mention, Cuba was already pretty corrupt with the Batista, the mafia, and all that. Like, again, these dictatorships are the results of like the absolutely terrible situations of capitalism in the past, and the fact that like these elements of capitalism can only be crushed like when you have a full chokehold within society, or else you're gonna get counter-revolution very soon.
Right.
Yeah. It looks like we have a new challenger here.
Yeah. Hi, Bobby.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Bobby, aka Egoisticist Philosophy. And
okay.
Yeah, and I'm an anarchist. Like
10 out of 10 intro, by the way.
Huh?
10 out of 10 intro. I can already sense the fear you have of us Leninists.
Nah, I don't fear Leninists. I just think you're kind of stupid, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Tell
damn.
him the rule. What the hell did he leave?
That was ableist. In case any live
Fucking
streamer is
mic
watching
drop.
right, in case any live person is watching right now, this is why Leninism is superior. I'm just saying.
When you said like you could smell the fear, I was like thinking like there could be like a Lenin perfume. Smell the Lenin.
Oh God, wouldn't that just be the smell of the Mausoleum in Russia?
It'd
Oh my
be like
God.
it'd be like a French perfume, be like Lenini.
Okay.
Lenison. Anyway, all right. So I want to go back to Cuba real quick. So you would say that Cuba needed repressive measures because of the embargo, right?
Not just because of the embargo. I wouldn't really say that at all. That contributed to the bad state that they're in. But I think they needed repressive measures because they were invaded by the most powerful country in the history of human civilization.
Right.
Not to mention like over 300 assassination attempts on Castro or something.
Something like that. The number is probably inflated, but yeah.
Yeah, or like, well, I'm pretty sure it had to be like at least in the dozens. I mean, you have like, and it's still going to be a full-on CIA effort to remove their communist neighbor.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if we think about it, if a communist revolution were to happen in Canada, I would even imagine that, like, it wouldn't be long before Canada would have to enact some, quote unquote, necessary measures, because even though the situation in Canada is, like, comfortable for most people, from what I'd imagine, the United States is still south of the border, and we do know how the United States would react to the communist revolution across its border, especially with a land border. So it would be pretty rough. If any country is trying to do something that every other country in the world doesn't want them to do and is fiercely opposed to, the way I would kind of describe it, I think, is I assume everyone in here supports trade union activity and workers' strikes and whatnot. Of course,
the way how I would kind of describe it metaphorically is that it's like when workers go on strike and the strike starts to drag on, and the workers' strike fund runs out and they don't have any income. In that moment, their life is a lot worse off. They have no income. They're just walking up and down with a picket all day long with no livelihood.
That's why they should go full insurrection.
Right, but within this metaphor, when they're on strike, their strike fund runs out. Their life is much worse off because they have no income. But the point is that they're striking for something that will make their lives better in the long run. That's kind of how I see worker states. It's a situation where it really sucks in the short term, but the point is, without doing that, there's no way to overcome capitalism and move on to a better stage of human development.
Yeah, like the problem I and a lot of other anarchists have with the concept of a worker state is that it's basically a nonsense concept, because like all you're basically doing is you're essentially transferring the economic and oppressive and exploitative conditions of capitalism to the state sector. So you're merely merely moving the oppression from one stage of economic subsistence to another, rather than actually abolishing it, which is what anarchists strive to do.
Right. I don't think so. The point of a socialist revolution that ends in the installation of the worker state is not to simply move to a different ruling class or what have you.
Well, maybe that's not the intention, but that's almost always proven to be the ultimate effect historically.
Hey, Bobby, I'm going to stop you right there just real quick. Just let Evan finish his thought first, then you go.
Okay.
Okay, Evan, go ahead.
Yeah, I disagree. I know people see it that way. I don't really see it that way though, because when you have a worker state, you have the means of production nationalized and put in the control of a public enterprise in the form of the state and state planning bureaucracy. I would argue that's at least a partial break from capitalism, because the means of production are no longer privately owned. There's no profit motive for them to have. So when there's no profit motive behind the economy, behind the ownership of the means of production, then I don't see how anyone's being exploited. Like, who are the profiteers in a worker state? Who is it that's actually profiting off of exploitation of labor? I don't see how that happens. Can you explain how exploitation happens in a system where there's no private ownership of the means of production?
Yeah, like the thing is, even without private ownership of the means of production, exploitation is still very much possible. Now, yes, certainly the profit motive contributes quite a bit to exploitation. However, Leninists, I find, tend to do this very reductionist thing, as if like the profit motive is the alpha and omega of all exploitation, which simply is not true. There are other exploitative forces that are just as bad, if not even more so, such as nationalism, such as ableism, such as cultural sexism, such as apartheid, such as slavery. And yes, many of these systems are somewhat connected to the profit motive, but many of them also predate the profit motive, so that somewhat invalidates, in my mind, the Leninist idea that the profit motive is the source of all evil in the world.
Well, it's a bit of a straw man. I didn't say it's the source of all evil. I said it's how exploitation works, because that's, as I understand it, that's the Marxist understanding of exploitation. Is the extraction of surplus value from the worker to go into private hands.
Yeah. Well, the anarchist concept of exploitation is a little bit broader than that.
Okay.
If I could just butt in here, I kind of I kind of want to change this to a sort of different direction. I still want to keep it within talk about like profit motive and exploitation and whatnot. But real quick, what I don't understand, because like, I mean, yes, I think that a state can definitely exploit its people without having to have a profit motive. But real quick, how would, because like we're talking about we live today in a monetary society, of course, right? So and a lot of the profits come from workers' wages, and of course the how do I put it? Yes, a lot of profits come from the workers' wages, which is, of course, you know, the less wages, the higher the profits, right? That we can generally agree on this. So
yeah.
Okay, so what I want to know is how a monetary system works under state socialism, because what I understand that, like, you know, Titoism had like a market-based socialism, as and you had used money. Russia used money. You know, China even used money. So what I like to know is how workers and those who those who are in charge of the state, you know, manage that kind of this wage system, and how that doesn't create a profit motive. That's what I like to know. How does a monetary system work in state socialism?
I don't get your question. You're asking about monetary systems or something else?
I'm just generally asking how a monetary system works under state socialism. That's what I mean.
Well, like the sort of medium-term goal will be to move towards labor vouchers, so that someone's labor is represented in a voucher that they exchange for goods, and it would. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really studied a whole lot about this, but as I understand, that would kind of help prevent, speculation and hoarding and what have you. But until I think that's something that could only be achieved once they've, progressed pretty far towards socialism. But until then, it would kind of just be regular money, I guess. And in fact, that's what they've had. They've had regular money, as far as I know, that works the same. I mean, there's bills and coins, and then they get that for their wages.
The same as what?
Like the same as in any other system.
So even in capitalism, you mean?
Yeah, they have money because they haven't moved on to a moneyless society yet. That's something for, full communism.
Okay, well then, I guess maybe a better question then would be how does the wage system work under state socialism?
Well, wages, as far as I know, like if you look at, for example, the Soviet Union, there was like 3 or 4 tiers of wages based on whether someone was skilled or not, or something like that. Like there was regular, like unskilled labor, and then skilled labor and professionals, and then at the top, of course, was the party bureaucracy, the apparatchiks, or whatever they were called. So yeah, there was just a few different tiers of wages, as far as I know. I mean, that's how the wages were set.
Won't they just make the black market of labor vouchers?
Yeah, I guess there could be. I mean, they probably did have that. But I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really studied this fully, so I'm not sure how to answer that. But as far as I understand, labor vouchers would be moving towards a system that tends away from speculation and hoarding and whatnot. But yeah, of course, if they can trade it for goods, then they can trade it for black market goods and services. So yeah, that probably did lead to a black market. Well, I don't know. The question of currency is another. It's kind of another form of struggle against the old system, and it's one that's kind of complicated. Like, for example, in Cuba, where a lot of people work in the the hospitality sector, and they get paid in American dollars because after the Soviet Union collapsed, they kind of have to rely on that. But anyways, I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly it is you want to know about currency or monetary systems.
I mean, I ask because, as in the capitalist system, it's exploitive because profit is driven to the top. It's driven to the bourgeoisie, to the upper class. While wages are lowered, which means people live in poverty, and that creates inequality. So, what I'm asking is, how does state socialism prevent that inequality with a wage system?
Well, yeah, they still have a wage system, but like I said, there's only a few different tiers of wages. And
even then, like, the wages would still largely be determined, through the working class, and pretty much like how much effort they put into their work and how productive they are. Like, a lot of people do say that wages are subjective, and to an extent there is some truth in that, but like, I would imagine like now people would start getting paid based on how productive they are. At this point, like, with a lot of the barriers of racism and sexism and class advantages removed, the wage system becomes far more fair and equal, obviously, and it would probably eventually have to end up transitioning to an instance where wages are no longer needed. It's just that, like, for the transitional time being, the best thing we can do is make sure that people are paid from each according to their ability, to each according to their under socialism, it would be from each according to their ability to each according to their contribution. Communism is when from each according to their ability to each according to their need.
Right.
So yes, the wage system becomes more equitable because things like, oh, my daddy is pretty rich, or I have connections and all that, those get removed, ideally. And therefore, like, the only thing that's really holding a person back is like how productive they want to be. And that's, in my opinion, how socialism actually encourages people, you know, to be active and to work and to be passionate about their work. Because, like, you know, now that people are going to be being paid based on their productivity, they have more of a desire to go seek what jobs they know they'll be good at and what jobs they'll love, rather than just go seek the job that's fashionable or because, you know, they have some sort of obligation to do so, or a job that would be denied to them based on certain factors. So that's how we see the wage system as being more equitable under the worker state system.
Well, I mean, to my understanding, under Leninism at the time when Russia was in that transition, my understanding is that wasn't really the case, where people could choose the job they would like to do. It seemed more like that was determined by what you got from the state, as well as as well as having more workers in a certain place than there needed to be. For example, like, you know, in a butcher shop, there'd be like 3 clerks instead of just 1. So, are you saying this as ideally, or are you saying this as this was the reality under Leninism?
I would say that I would say it was more. I'd say this is definitely more ideally, but the thing is that, like, complications within the Leninist state, especially due to the need to industrialize and all that, kind of mess things up a little bit. However, there are also instances, like, from what I remember, like, you know, you see all these people, like, who are, like, from ex-communist countries saying that now I can't work as an engineer or a scientist anymore because my industry closed down, and now I have to go work in this place that I don't really want to be. A lot of people lost their jobs because they were no longer profitable once the communist system collapsed. That's why you have like a massive brain drain from the more older people in the Eastern Bloc. What they did and want to do is no longer going to be valued by capitalism. And they can't get any sort of wages for that, despite the fact that they have the ability to be insanely productive.
Yeah, I don't think there's any system right now that can give people, like, the perfect unlimited range of choices for what kind of job they want, because that's basically impossible under a scarce economy. It's not till we get to post-scarcity that it's not till we get to post-scarcity when we have a situation where you can just do anything that you want, and the sky's the limit. You can spend all your day being like an artist or whatever. Until then, there's certain sectors that need people to work in them, and those people, when you get a job, you're going to be probably assigned based on that. There's going to be some personal choice factored into it, but it necessarily kind of has to be a balance of both. But even putting that to the side, I think the biggest advantage when you have state socialism is that it provides full employment. That's something that they pretty much came very close to achieving, if not almost completely achieved, in worker states such as the Soviet Union. That's something that has never happened in under capitalism, because it's actually desired not. I mean, I don't have to sell why capitalism is bad to you, but point being that the fact that they had full employment, that's proof that they were taking a step in the right direction, even if they couldn't get to a point where everyone had the job that they wanted to have.
Full employment is a bad idea. We need full unemployment.
Yeah, but that's way off. That's utopia. Yeah. That's a post-scarcity, full communist society. We're talking about what we can achieve.
Yeah, okay. I have a little thing. You talk about, like, you have, like, in so-called state socialist societies, people have reached in a level where, but is that really necessary in a time where more and more jobs are becoming more and more obsolete because of technology? Like, wouldn't it be better to just take advantage of it and decentralize and use it for the workers use it for their own advantage?
Yeah.
You're kind of okay. So you're asking, isn't full employment bad because? Oh, careful there. You're saying isn't full employment bad because we have automation and therefore we don't need full employment because we can just automate
I was
instead?
just saying, like, why would you, like, what? How would you have full employment when you have all those machines taking away people's jobs? Like, those labor isn't necessary. So what
Well,
you
then
can
they
do
do
is
something else. I don't get why that would be a problem. They just find something else for them to do. If there's nothing else for them to do, then we've already made it to full communism. So there's no,
Hey,
there's
Evan,
no problem there.
who's they? Who are you describing as they? Who's choosing the jobs for the people? Who's doing that?
Well, ideally, it would be a democratically planned economy.
Right.
But yeah, there would be someone in a role that facilitates the assignment of jobs. So yeah, it would be
Probably people like, I
want
do
to be a
believe
state
human resources
bureaucracy.
deals with this sorts of thing, doesn't it? Or is human resources something else?
yeah, like a
Like an
workers'
unemployment
human.
office, you mean, something like that.
Well, like ideally, like, you know, when people have a sort of freedom, like in the education system, to pretty much show off their skills and whatnot, it becomes apparent what they're good at, what they're passionate in, because usually there's a massive correlation between being good at something and actually liking it. Because, you know, the motivation to do something takes over. So by the time you've had your skills set, like, pretty much a lot of people under socialism will already know what they want to do, and they'll probably follow it through once they graduate and all that. Not everyone was like continuously redirected, and if they were redirected, then well, it's probably because, like, you know, the economy is like pretty much lacking in the production of necessary goods and services in some places, and like, you know, without the need, and like sometimes like push comes to shove and all that. And like, if for those that are unsure, well, again, even under capitalism, we still have people that, you know, see others that help them find what sorts of careers they're looking for.
Yeah. Point being that technology-driven unemployment is only a problem under capitalism, because under capitalism it causes some contradictions. How can you have the system function like that when there's no buying power because you're laying so many people off? Mm-hmm. But under socialism, it's not a problem at all. It's a good problem to have if you can't find work for people. If all the work's already being done, then it's like, we made it. We're good.
Right. So then, what would the function of a state be in, like, what we call like a transhumanist society then? Like, why would we need a state if everything's going to be automated?
Well, we need a state until we get there.
Until we get there. Okay.
You have the technology, though.
We don't, not all of it. I would argue we don't have all the technology. We're getting. I think we're close to that, but we're not quite there. Because plus there are just some things that can't be automated. You know,
yeah.
like a medical doctor, I guess. But then again, there's plenty of people who love to be doctors.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go on to another topic, because I think we've kind of been there long enough. We did kind of cover these more or less. Okay, let me see. All right, so so when we're talking about state socialism, that doesn't necessarily mean a classless society, right? That, because like communism is the classless society is what we mean. But in state socialism, would you say that state socialism implies a classless society?
No.
No.
If there's a state, then there's still class warfare to be waged.
Pretty much.
But what happens is that the state becomes the capitalist class. You basically turn, like, the Soviet Union state was basically just one giant corporation.
how is it a corporation when it's a public entity that represents everyone?
Because it accumulates surplus values and uses it to buy weapons to blow people up. It was a very imperialistic and
What? Are you done? Oh. Well, yeah, it uses surplus value to buy weapons to defend itself. They had to defend themselves. They were under constant threat.
Yeah, pretty much.
Vegan, you got anything to add to that? Any rebuttal?
I'm still trying to come up with one, to be honest. I know it's so cringeworthy.
Yeah.
Bobby?
Also, to kind of add on to Vegan's points about the Soviet Union, another thing about the Soviet Union was that it was not nearly as worker-friendly as it presented itself in its public propaganda. And I mean, like, workers had essentially, well, they had more rights than they did in the USA and Nazi Germany at the time, but still, like, workers that went against the state and actually tried to put actual communism into practice at, like, creating a stateless, classless, moneyless society, because the Soviet Union was a state, and as such it had the economic and social concerns of a state, and the nature of a state is essentially to create a monopoly upon violence in a certain geographic area. That created very repressive conditions for Soviet workers, as Noam Chomsky, whom I don't always agree with on everything, stated in an interview. Workers were virtual slaves in the Soviet Union. It was almost the precise opposite of socialism in that way.
How are they slaves, though?
Like a lot of the time you get some people from the ex-Soviet bloc who like I said earlier, a lot of them lost their jobs after the communist system collapsed, and they feel like the capitalist system doesn't provide them the same necessities like necessary welfare and all that. And they feel like in the former Eastern Bloc, which is pretty much capitalist right now, a lot of them feel a lot more exploited. And well, there are going to be workers who do say from former Eastern Bloc say they feel they're a lot more free, but then you discover a lot of them were born in 1980 or something, so they obviously weren't working by the time it collapsed.
Yeah. Well, my point is, when you have a monopoly upon violence within a certain geographic definition, which is kind of the classic definition of the state, that inevitably creates conditions of conflict and economic exploitation. And that's not to say that that such conditions cannot exist in a stateless society. I mean, certainly the fact that there are anarcho-capitalists would discredit that idea. Quote, anarcho-capitalist, of course.
Keck.
Because it is inconsistent to claim to be for freedom and at the same time support economic exploitation and consolidation of power in the hands of an elite minority.
I don't see how it automatically leads to exploitation.
Because human nature checkmates ML.
Oh God.
Like I
I
hate
was
that.
joking here.
All right.
Yeah,
It was
Stand
a
like
up.
joke.
yeah. I know you were joking, vegan, because I know you, but at the same time, like, that argument makes me cringe every time. And it's not just when you do it, it's when anyone fucking does it. And the fact
Well, yeah, same.
that
Same.
people think that that's actually a good argument instead of a reductionist, essentialist,
Right.
like,
Bobby,
cop-out.
Bobby. We need to stay on topic here. main argument here. We all agree human nature argument's bullshit.
Right.
Right. So right. Actually, I got another question. So as a green anarchist, as me a vegan are, we believe that hierarchy does not cannot possibly create a ecologically friendly society. So I want to ask, what do you think justifies a state in order how would state socialism create an ecologically friendly society, do you think?
Well, for starters, a lot of environmental protectionism, I believe, best comes in the form of actual regulations that are pretty much backed by force, and environmentalists and ecologists working for the state may be able to help better present conditions for environmental protection, as opposed to, let's say, let's say, various anarchist communes. They may have a conflict of interest when it comes to, needing to keep their industries or farmlands intact versus, say, the protection of the environment. Or then you have like some communes that may get at odds with each other over their desire to control similar resources or resources that shouldn't even be controlled. Again, the environment needs protection, and I do believe that a state that, like, through democratic essentialism, would be the legitimate body to essentially ensure that protection. What would you say, Ev?
Yeah, right now state socialism is the only way to stave off environmental catastrophe due to global climate change, because there's millions of people whose livelihood depends on the destruction of the environment. The only way to change that scenario is with a worker state that uses democratic centralism to decide to shut down those industries and to start developing cleaner ones.
I would like to reply. Have you seen the environmental history of the Soviet Union?
Yes, we are well aware of the fact that, like,
Yeah.
the Soviet Union did not have the best environmental record, but, like, to say it was completely fucked, in my opinion, is wrong. Like, the Soviet Union did have a lot of environmentalist efforts as well. East Germany, from what I understand, was also big on environmentalism too. Like, they pretty much teach kids to recycle and all that, and not to pollute. So yeah, like, it wasn't hopeless. And besides, at the time, it wasn't like the capitalist states were any better. I know it's whataboutism, but, like, environmentalism pretty much grew in a movement where the Cold War was happening. So both the capitalist and communist states were pretty much reacting to these newly developing ideas.
Yeah, I would answer that with three major points. Number one, with like, in terms of climate change, I believe the climate change movement and the whole recognition that it's happening, that we need to stop it, only started around the late 80s, when the entire East Bloc was already collapsing. Not to say that there wasn't any environmental concerns before that, but at least in terms of climate change, which is, one, like, the major crisis that we need to avert right now. Number two, just because you can make decisions doesn't mean the decisions are going to be good. But if you don't have the ability to make the decisions at all, then you're not going to change it at all. And the only way to do that is with a, like I said, with with a workers' state that uses democratic centralism, for the reason that I stated earlier. And number three, if you want to look at a modern workers' state and their environmental record, you can look at Cuba, which is the most sustainable country on the earth.
Well, yes. Nobody here disagrees that socialist states and socialist societies in general tend to have a far better environmental consciousness than capitalist societies, which kind of goes without saying, because socialism in general is about looking after the people, whereas capitalism is about looking after the economic interests of the quote unquote individual. I'd argue that capitalism is not a legitimate form of individualism, and considering its hierarchical nature, it very much contradicts its claims to be individualistic, but like that's sort of the reputation it has. And one of the main methods by which it legitimizes itself.
Okay, nothing really to respond to there. Dan, do you want to move on?
Yeah. All right. I guess one last point. I guess I want to make. Let's see here. Right. What was I thinking about? Okay. So I guess we already kind of discussed inequality under state socialism. Like you'd say that inequality is sort of, well, it seems to me that a lot of state socialism has a lot to do with like necessary evil, because you have to fight back against the capitalists as well as attempt to create a social society, while also maintaining a power base in order to fight back against capitalists. So what I want to ask is, what is the justification to have that inequality? Okay, because like what my thoughts are right now. Okay, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but just bear with me. Okay, so to my understanding, there has been, of course, there can be poverty under state socialism. I mean, like you say, yes, you guys have full employment. You think that people can really can choose what they would like to do. And of course, until like automation, which is then, anybody can actually really authentically do whatever they like to. But then, how can poverty exist under state socialism when you claim that anybody can basically do whatever they like? Because like, there's the Soviet style apartments that exists that exists in Russia right now. They're big buildings but small rooms, and lots of families like live in them. And of course, there's some places that are incredibly dirty and stuff like that. I'm saying more or less as of today, but that still existed like in the 80s and 70s and 60s within the USSR. So I guess my question is, why does poverty exist under state socialism when you claim to have full employment, as well as anybody can choose what they would like to do?
Well, for starters, I think there's multiple points to this. For starters, those Soviet apartments you mentioned in the 70s and 80s weren't actually exclusive to state socialism. I mean, you can find them in capitalist countries like in the Middle East. You can see them in Canada. I've seen them in America. I've seen them. Like it's just like low cost housing. Don't know why it has to look so ugly, but
Right.
I don't know. Like to blame it on state socialism is completely unfair. I mean, like actual state socialist architecture would be like Karl Marx Alley in Berlin, or the Stalinist architecture, like the Palace of Arts and Sciences in Warsaw, in Poland.
Can I stop right there? Can I stop right there? I was using the Soviet apartments as sort of an example as to how poverty exists, because, like, you know, you have, because, like, usually state bureaucrats and in under state socialist societies have, you know, larger houses, they have better living spaces, and usually, you know, have better facilities as well, while those who are like skilled and even unskilled laborers usually would have, you know, houses and have, you know, very good plumbing and utilities and stuff like that. I mean, like, I in fact read this within Putin's own biography, where he lived in a very poor part of Stalingrad in the late 50s and early 60s. So, I mean, my question is more or less in general how poverty exists under state socialism.
Well, another thing also is that, like, just because, like, you know, state socialists have like removed a lot of the capitalist instances, that like, let's say a lot of capitalist tendencies, doesn't mean that poverty won't automatically disappear. Like, but the thing is that the Soviet Union reduced a lot of poverty that had been occurring in the ex-Russian Empire, and Castro had reduced a lot of poverty that had been going on in the ex-Batistas, Cuba, Mao, and the former Qing Empire and all that, if that was the right dynasty. So yes, there was still poverty, but it was greatly reduced. And not to mention, like, even though like people still, I wouldn't argue that they were poor-ish, they still had a lot of their necessities met, like education, healthcare, and all that. Even if infrastructure wasn't the best, it was certainly a leg up from what they used to have, or what they could have had had they still been continuing under these mafia-run right-wing under right-wing capitalist dictatorships.
Yeah, the people were poor because the. Hang on.
Is someone calling? Huh.
Nah.
Wait, maybe it's a fan who heard me on the argument. Yeah, go on.
I
Yeah,
also
hang on. I'm going first.
Yeah, let Evan go. Let Evan go.
The people are poor because the country is poor. Like, socialism is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It doesn't put gold in the hills or oil in the ground. They only have so much resources in the first place.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess you're coming from there. Bobby, you had something to say?
Yeah, like I just like to point out a lot of state socialists seem to be really skilled at pointing out capitalist classism, yet they seem to have like some sort of blinders on when it comes to the classism of their own leaders.
No.
I mean, in my experience, and I'm not saying all state socialists are like that, but a lot of the ones I've met have been like that.
So you mean like the whole leaders live in wealth while the poor people live in poverty thing, right?
Well, yeah, but it's not just that. It's more the fact that like the whole idea behind state socialism is basically that like the whole core premise behind state socialism is that the workers are not at a level where they can where they can manage their own affairs effectively. And obviously, as an anarchist, I would strongly disagree with that. And so, like, this whole notion of the vanguard party. It's basically transferring power from one oppressive, exploitative hierarchy to another, and that seems rather counterproductive to me.
Well, here's some few things about the whole disparity thing. For starters, a lot of socialist leaders, although they lived, I wouldn't argue that they lived more comfortably than the average worker, but like they didn't, not all of them had the palace. I mean, Stalin was believed to have lived completely frugally and like modestly. And so there's that. And not to mention that it is a little cynical that it does become a bit of a club and all that. However, like it wasn't like such a massive disparity like compared to say in capitalist countries where like you have your average worker and then you have the rich, and then you have like the rich people like owning a massive significant portion of the wealth. Like the disparity was a lot more closer in under like, you know, the worker states. It was there. I wouldn't argue that, and that was a bit of a flaw. You know, revisionism comes in and all that, but it was technically far smaller than the disparities you'd see elsewhere. And right now, like we can see an even far more massive disparity in the post 1991 era in the Eastern Bloc states, where like the mafia and the government officials are like insanely far more rich than the others, like the workers they lived under.
All right. Anybody else got anything to add to that?
Bobby?
Yeah, the a lot of state socialists seem to basically attribute all the oppression of capitalism to the profit motive and class consolidation, and ignore the common problems that both state socialism and capitalism inherently produce, which is economic and consolidation of wealth and hierarchical consolidation of power.
I don't think consolidation of wealth really happens that much under state socialism, or at least not nearly as much as under capitalism. So I don't think they're ignoring that. And consolidation of power, that's something that's sometimes necessary, as for reasons that I explained earlier. So,
right.
You say wealth as in like stuff like basic necessities, right? That's what you mean, as in like, you know, what I put it, like basic healthcare, food, water.
Correct.
Stuff like that. Okay. I mean, I was asking that for Evan, but yeah, I assume that's what you meant. Okay. I kind of want let's change the conversation real quick. Considering it's just been anarchists sort of really just asking Lenin's questions. Well, why don't you guys ask us questions? You guys got anything to ask us, Evan and Sergio?
Pretty much just like how would anarchists ensure things like universal healthcare, universal education, universal public transportation, and all that.
We did have that during Anarchist Catalonia.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty. I'd rather not say more because I still have a kind of a little bit of ignorance. So I'd rather have like the other two anarchists talk about in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, and like a lot of anarchists tend to support what's called a universal basic income, and what that does is it essentially provides people and workers with all their basic necessities, healthcare, education, and so on, and it's decentralized, so it's harder for the state or some capitalist corporation to just pass a law to get rid of it than it would be if it was a more traditional centralized governmental law. And that's sort of the advantage of decentralization in general. Decentralization, it's not perfect, obviously, because nothing is, but to me, decentralization allows for people to get their needs met far more easily than centralization does.
All right.
Pretty much.
Add to is well, I mean, a lot of kind of how healthcare worked under anarchist Catalonia, if I remember correctly, was, well, basically, of course, if anybody wanted to be a doctor or wanted to help out with medical care, they could. Everybody also had, you know, it's a bit of a broad subject, of course, but basically, of course, even under a capitalist society, a doctor will help somebody in need no matter what. Usually, anyway. I mean, unless they're like absolute quacks. But in anarchist Catalonia, basically, you know, healthcare worked as in there was doctors and nurses, and they had their own hospitals, and of course, and that was absolutely necessary considering this was in the middle of a war. So, and basically, there was, like, of course, the unions, which basically, like, the medical what do you call them? Medical units, as well as, you know, doctors, nurses, and so on. We're all mostly a part of, they were all part of the CNT. And they basically could make their own decisions within the ranges of that hospital and whatnot. And they also got a lot of their materials. Actually, medical care was a lot better than it was before the Catalan Revolution. Mostly because glassware wasn't a thing in Spain. Mostly, there was very few, at least in Catalonia, there was very, very, very few ways to make glass, which of course is very important in order to create medical. What do you call it? Like medical materials, yeah. Which were provided by, of course, the factory unions who created that glass, and you know, they transported that to those health systems, to those hospitals and whatnot. So basically, I would say that's basically how it works. You know, they agreed that between the medical union and those factory unions, they agreed to transfer those materials to those hospitals. That's basically how healthcare worked.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question. There's a lot to do with healthcare. You can, of course, I could basically just say through all this, just go read the Anarchist Fact. I mean, of course, you would say also, why don't you just go read State and Revolution? But there's a lot to it, and, you know, there's a lot more research to it. But I'd say that's basically how healthcare works.
Okay.
I suppose.
Yeah. So, you know, all right. Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. How long have we been going on here? For like an hour and a half or so?
More or less.
Yeah.
Okay. Any closing statements anybody wants to make?
Yeah, we Leninists totally won.
Yep, we won as usual.
Kronstadt, yay. Nah.
Okay. Vegan Bobby, anything else you want to say before we go?
Yeah, basically, and there have been many examples of decentralized societies able to keep themselves safe from bigger aggressors, whether it's ancient Greece, which was just a bunch of city-states, or the Iroquois. And the necessities like food, shelter, medical care, etc., was able to historically to be provided in anarchist Catalonia, and standard of living did increase, and there was no class distinctions. And so I think that anarchism would be better than Marxism Leninism, because historically there has been less inequality, and yeah, it may be harder to defend yourself, but even then, like, it's not impossible.
Yeah. And also, to add on to Vegan's point again, while state socialism provides for an easier defense, there are still methods by which anarchists can defend themselves, such as workers' militias and things of that sort. I'm something of a pacifist, so I mean, obviously I'm not a total pacifist. I do believe in self-defense, but and also I tend to find the idea of militias kind of minarchistic as opposed to truly anarchistic, and obviously there is a distinction there that a lot of state socialists, in my experience, fail to make.
Yeah, and also we can have civilians learn basic gun techniques, so they can have like whenever they get ambushed, they have whatever they need to defend themselves, because they're trained like they do in Switzerland. They almost very rarely get invaded because, well, they're pretty good at defending themselves, and yet again, they're very decentralized.
They're also in the middle of mountains, but okay.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a technical advantage. So, yeah. I also kind of this is kind of a bit my own perspective. I mean, I can see where you guys are coming from with, like, you know, these repressive measures. There'd have to be repressive measures in order to preserve the revolution, as well as to defend against capitalist invaders and so on. But I believe that I don't think there should be suffering for people, no matter, even if it is in the long run that'll be beneficial, because I think that life is better preserved when people are happier, when they're able to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even if that means that, you know, there's a possibility of losing all of that, it's the happiest moment of people's lives will be within that determined range. I know, like, for example, in a documentary, A Living Utopia, Catalonian anarchists have said, you know, that were still alive then, you know, when they were interviewed, they said that was like the happiest moments in their lives. And I think that's what needs to be provided to people. I think that people deserve to be happy, and I think that way is through anarchism.
It's better to live on your feet. I mean, it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As well as authoritarianism usually creates less empathetic individuals, as well as creates unfairness, which, you know, creates unhappiness. So that's just personally my view, really. That's just, like, you know, I'm not saying that's like the most efficient way to defend a revolution. I'm not saying that's that. I just think, you know, even if it's in the short run, I think it's just better to have people live happier lives.
Also,
than it is just to simply preserve a very far gone future where it's only then that people can be happy.
Also, I'd like to point out that sure, anarchism creates prosperity and order in the short term, but it almost always deadens creative, but it almost always impinges upon creative freedom, which is kind of a big deal for me as an artist. And and it almost always leads to massive amounts of censorship and privilege in the hands of a few.
Right. Well, that's a discussion for another day. So I think we're just gonna end it here then. Thanks everybody for watching our live broadcast.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
This was very educational experience, even if we almost killed each other over it.
And make sure you subscribe to my channel, The Vegan Anarchist, and Bobby's
Ego is the piss of his philosophy.
Right.
Yeah,
We're gonna
so
link
subscribe
those
to
in the
us.
description below. And yeah, also for those who are listening to us through SoundCloud, this will probably be the last podcast because we're just mainly using YouTube from now on. I will still be probably making those Revolutions episodes, which I know it's still a very long time coming. I just had so much trouble scheduling people, but yeah, there'll definitely be those for now. But basically, this will probably be our last podcast. So thank you, Vegan Anarchist and Bobby, for joining us. We'll see all you comrades soon, and at least we can all agree on that capitalism sucks.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Fuck capitalism.
Fuck capitalism in the
Fuck
ass.
capitalism. Save the animals.
All right.
Well, see you later.
Bye.
Right.